Welcome to Bluegrass Brooklyn, our podcast all about the music we love, straight from the Bluegrass borough of Brooklyn, New York. Okay, so here we are with Philip Graham, the owner of Ear Trumpet Labs. If you've seen your favorite artist on stage with the cool-looking retro brass-fitted mics, and they sound great, they look great, well, those are Ear Trumpet. Those are the iconic microphone, especially in the bluegrass community. And we felt it would be interesting to hear about the company that puts these together and the process and everything. So we've asked Philip to join us. Philip, thanks for the time.
Hi, Mike. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate you taking time to join us. So first things first, what was your title again?
Officially, it is the proprietor / bricoleur.
Okay.
When you have your own company, you get to make up fancy titles. I like proprietor for the sort of impression of somebody sort of sitting there in an apron, taking care of customers, which is what I like to do.
Yeah.
Bricoleur is a fancy art world term for assemblage as an art form. So if you think about Joseph Cornell or somebody like that making art from assembling found pieces and objects, and that's how most of my mic designs come together. They're actually repurposed other parts and pieces.
As I understand, you were a software engineer. How is it a software engineer finds his way into manufacturing and designing microphones?
Frustration with being a software engineer.
Yeah.
Largely. Yeah. I mean, that was a fun job when the internet was brand new and everything was fresh construction and felt like we were inventing the world.
Right.
But it got more and more boring as everything got standardized and development practices did. And my company, I worked for tiny little companies where I had basically a lot of free reign. And then we kept getting acquired and turning into larger companies. And it was driving me nuts. And so for years, I would keep my sanity by building various things with my hands in the basement. I built pinhole cameras, and then I got into audio gear. I started off with tube guitar amplifier things. I'm a very bad guitar player. I'm the kind of guitar player that like fusses around with building amps a lot more than I practice. So I was doing that, tube circuits and things like that. And then my daughter, Maliki, is a songwriter. And when she first took up songwriting, we started talking about, well, we should find some way to record these. Like, this would be great. We've got this cool wooden room space in the basement of our house that probably sounds pretty good. And I had built some tube preamp kinds of things. I was very excited, and then I realized I knew nothing about microphones and started looking into them. And just because I was in this habit of building things for myself, as I started looking at microphones and realized that really nice studio microphones cost a lot, I was like, well, maybe I could build one. And that just started me down a rabbit hole of learning mic circuits, learning the construction. And because I was doing it all on my little workbench in my basement, I just had this thought that they could really look like anything. Once you have the circuitry and the capsule part together, there's a lot of freedom about what housing you can actually put them in. It needs to be a metal shield for noise shielding, but within that constraint, it can be pretty much anything. And it turns out it affects the sound a great deal. So there is a lot of trial and error in getting the sound right and getting the design to work with the sound. But I thought, why not make them what I considered beautiful or at least interesting looking, if I'm going to go to the trouble of making one.
Yeah, if you watch like Flatt & Scruggs Grand Ole Opry, the mic that they're usually standing in front of looks very much like several of yours. Or you see the old movies where there's the radio announcer with the fedora leaning forward to the mic, chattering away. It always looks like one of your mics. Are you drawing design inspiration from those things?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. They're not literal copies of any design from that period, but the style, especially that like ring, outer ring, and spring shock mount suspension was something I very deliberately took from those 20s and 30s designs. Yeah, I love that period of industrial design. That's definitely the feel and the vibe. And functionally, they work great too.
Well, if I ever do a steampunk role-playing scenario, I know that the Overlord will be sitting in front of a mic that looks very much like an ear trumpet, issuing orders to his minions.
They're around in like Hollywood prop shops now.
I bet.
So they're available. We heard they got used in the Hunger Games, one of the prequel Hunger Games movies. I mean, who knows? It's a movie maybe nobody saw. But as soon as we heard about that before it came out, and I was suddenly very worried that it was going to be the terrible rich people overlords microphone. But it turns out it was the microphone for the scrappy underdogs in their impromptu nightclub.
Just like bluegrass music. Before we go into how the mics are being used in bluegrass, tell us a little bit about the company. As I understand, it's a family business still.
Yeah, in an increasingly expansive sense, I guess. So my daughter manages the business with me, Maliki, after she got out of college and has pursued her music career. Everybody working at the company pretty much are musicians or creatives in one way or in another. And so we do a standard 32-hour week to give people time to practice their own creativity. And so Maliki's been able to keep her music career going, and it made sense for her to come in and help me run the company. It's a small workshop team. In addition to us, there's another 4 builders that are doing the actual mic construction and circuit building and testing and all that good stuff. We're actually working on transitioning to an employee-owned co-op. So all of those people, many of them have been with me for more than a decade now. They've really built the company as much as I have. So it's really going to be all of us together.
That is awesome. Let's talk a little bit about the process of putting together one of these mics. I know I'm talking to them all the time, but I'm not sure I know what goes on inside. Why don't you give us the nickel tour of the mechanics and electronics of a mic?
So all of my models are condenser mics. Usually the general microphone technology gets divided into 3 categories: as condensers, dynamics, and ribbons. Condensers are the most sensitive, generally the most accurate. Their capsule is a very simple mechanism with a metallized membrane stretched a very tiny distance in front of a backplate that has a charge on it or across that gap. So it's essentially a capacitor that varies as the air vibrates that thin little diaphragm. That's a great way of turning air movement into an electronic signal, but it's a very tiny signal. And so condenser mics always need to have active circuitry right there as the next thing in the chain. So in the mic itself, there has to be some powered circuitry.
And that power is typically external to the mic, right?
Yes, that's supplied to the mic. Early days, the earliest versions of these used tubes because it was the only kind of active electronics they had. So tube mics you hear about are still used very commonly in recording studios. They can sound really gorgeous, and the tube itself contributes a certain amount of very pleasing harmonic warmth. The tubes take a ton of power, and so those always have their own little external power supply. Then in the 60s-ish, as circuitry transitioned to transistors, they developed a standard of providing a small amount of power over the mic cable itself. And that became a standard so that pretty much any condenser mic uses the same level of power called phantom power.
And why phantom? Do you know?
Yeah, I think it comes from this idea that it's there on the regular mic cable that carries the signal. It's such a cool name.
It is.
Once somebody thought of it, it's like, yeah, it's phantom power. So anyway, ours use phantom power. Ours are transistor based. We use an FET, which behaves very much like a tube. They have their own kind of warmth. They're a little pesky in that there's quite a lot of variation in the manufacture of them, so that each individual little transistor behaves slightly differently. And so we need to test them all in a test rig, run a signal through them, check them on an oscilloscope to set a couple of resistors that set its operating volt, and then you build up a little individual circuit for each.
So based on the characteristics of a transistor, one mic may be slightly different in terms of electronic componentry from another.
It's got different resistors to get the FET to behave basically the way that you want it to. But then once they're optimized, they all pretty much sound the same. Yeah, so it's labor intensive is I guess what
it sounds
what I'm getting at, to get it to really be as high quality a sound as we can get.
If I think of a microphone manufacturer, I just imagine an assembly line of people just repeatedly plugging parts into slots and passing it to the next guy or gal. But this sounds like a very handcrafted, and I guess I'll use the word intimate process to put together the mics the right way.
I like the word intimate for it, yeah. I mean, that's how we think of it. There are certainly parts of building a microphone that can be very industrialized. I don't know that large automated manufacturers do, for instance, individually bias their FETs or do things like that. We do the whole process pretty intimately. We hand populate and solder all of the electronics in it. So there's the full circuit, all of the physical parts and pieces. And say many of them are foundry purposed, as I said, but then there's a lot of metalwork that goes into preparing the parts. So we try and do a small batch, hand built. It's manufacturing, and we're trying to be as efficient as we can to help keep the cost down as reasonably as we can. But we design everything so that the work gets done in small batches, so nobody's doing the same task for more than an hour or so at a time, just to keep hands from going numb. And there's metalwork, preparing all the different parts of the mic. There's circuit building. There's that FET testing. There's testing of the capsules and classifying them and all of that. And then there's the actual assembling, putting together the finished mic, which once all of those parts and pieces are done, was only a half hour or an hour or so.
By the way, for the listeners, Bluegrass Brooklyn podcast is powered by Ear Trumpet mics. So I'm looking at mine sitting right in front of me, and it's got all these interesting metal parts and the stand and do you manufacture those, or those are purchased separately and assembled?
Many of the parts are pieces that I found that work with some slight modification. So you're looking at your Dephina there.
Yep.
And the Dephina, Edwina, and the Myrtle have a very similar kind of head basket that holds the capsule there. So the plates around the face there are actually electrical conduit resizing rings. The little copper tube that forms the body of that head basket is just a section of large copper plumbing pipe that we cut a small section of.
So cool.
The body itself is a piece of copper plumbing pipe. The screens, we shape those screens ourselves. And then it's a bunch of bolts and thumb screws and bits and bobs and pieces that come together.
How long has the company been around as a company?
14 years.
Nice.
Yeah, 2011, summer of 2011.
Let's talk a little bit about the variety of models of Ear Trumpet microphones. I guess any mic could be used for anything. They're best suited for certain uses. Give us an idea of how that all works.
There are several that are really ideal for the sort of classic gather a full band around them kind of application, which just means they sound full and accurate and natural out to a fair distance away from the mic. So those would be any of the ones with the ring and spring suspension, those sort of larger scale ones. The Myrtle and the Louise are the most popular of those. Josephine also does that. Then there's the Dephina that you have.
Right.
Mid to larger distance it's designed for. Then there's some that are more optimized for a somewhat closer use. Usually they're best on a single source, like for miking a single instrument from 6 to 8 inches or doing closer vocals, especially on a louder stage. That would be the Edwina, the Chantel, the Wanda, our newest, is more of a close mic one. One of the big differences is that they have less low end because as you get close to any directional mic, the low end naturally boosts. So you can use them quite close without them getting too boomy, too bassy.
So it's the iconic image of the bluegrass band stepping to and stepping away from the mic and just working around that. So it sounds like the halo ring or just plain round like the Dephina mic are the ones you want to use for that, as opposed to highly directionalized vocal mics.
Yeah, it's the pickup pattern on all of them really is a semicircle. It's called a cardioid pattern. It's basically 180 degrees on one side of the mic is where the sensitivity is. So they're pretty generous as far as being able to move side to side and work within that sort of bubble shape pattern. The ring and spring, this is where the visual design comes in and intersects with the functionality. The larger ring and spring visual centerpiece works really well as a sort of visual anchor for a band, a full band to work around. The specific thing that I'm designing for acoustically, trying to optimize for, is to make these mics really stable and usable on a live stage, a live setting.
Right.
So to do this kind of distance miking, getting a full band, multiple players around on a live stage, that's always been a job for a condenser mic. But most condenser mics are really designed for studio use. And some of them work reasonably well live. Many of them really don't. As far as I know, I'm one of the few people to consciously design a condenser mic for live stage stability.
Exactly. In smaller venues, especially what you described, which is this one mic. And you can hear all the band members with unmiked, but someone wants to sing or wants to get a little more heard. That's what I would like to refer to as the bluegrass shuffle, where people are going to and from and such. To that point, it's a real transition for a acoustic musician from the jam circle, say, where we're sitting around in the circle, it's totally acoustic, to using a microphone. I noticed on your website there was some material on how to approach and use a mic. So do you want to summarize that for us?
We have a video that we did in a workshop kind of setting with a band who is very skilled at doing this. The first thing to be aware of is that it does take practice. It's as much a part of the performance as the actual playing of the instruments and working together and harmonizing and all of that. The basics are, don't panic. Be aware of what the pickup pattern of the mic is. Try and picture in your head, okay, it's picking up on one side in kind of a big bubble that goes both up and down and side to side. People often forget that. They just only think about the side to side part of it.
Right.
Usually with a band, my advice is always position the mic and yourselves initially with the mic basically equidistant from every sound source. So the voices and instruments, and just try and figure out how close can you get where you're all about the same distance. You want to think of it as you're playing to one ideal listener who is standing right there where the mic is.
Yeah.
So imagine there's just somebody right there in front of you. And what do you want them to hear? What do you want that to sound like?
Interesting.
So with our mics, I work a lot on keeping the sound very consistent all the way around the pattern. So the tone doesn't really change. But as you do get around right to the side of the mic, it is quieter. It is still picking you up, but it drops 6 dB or so when you're absolutely on the side of the mic. Now you can use that sort of to your band arrangement advantage. Put your loudest instruments on the sides.
Oh, yeah.
Banjo player. It's usually
go stand over there.
One of the ones on the sides. If, for instance, the banjo player is coming in to do vocals, you can actually push the banjo itself a little bit in front, almost in front of the mic, a little bit past, and lean in sideways so your voice is getting picked up, but the banjo is in a less receptive part of the mic. There's lots of little things that you can do with that. And that's basically to balance. Then you get into the whole dynamics of the performance and trading leads and different players stepping in and out, vocalists coming in it's practice. It's the dance. Yeah, it's absolutely a technique. The bass is one that will really, really come up and bite you because so many sound engineers really come up and learn whatever they learn just doing rock and roll shows in small clubs. And that's just their go-to. And they're a little flabbergasted by acoustic music, and especially acoustic bass. And their instinct is to like, well, you want to make the floor shake, right? Not exactly. That's the one other mic, sorry, that I forgot to mention in our lineup. We do make one. The Nadine is specifically for mounted on upright bass to get that a proper acoustic bass tone. Well, and this is what really started me with making these mics and focusing on live usage for them was a frustration with seeing the way that so many folk musicians, singer-songwriters were always amplified in a live setting. Everybody would plug in their guitar with a really terrible sounding pickup and use a 58, which is a rock and roll mic, because the sound person is always telling you, like, get right up on the mic, because a 58 can really only be used very close. It sounds awful from more than 3 inches away.
Oh.
It's designed for that. There's a use for that mic if you're on a stage with really loud amplifiers and drums and stuff.
Right.
You have to get close. But it just killed me to see purely acoustic musicians using these techniques that were compromises for a loud stage. And it's like, you have no stage volume. Why are you doing this? What monster has distorted the whole perception of how acoustic music should sound live? And I came in not knowing much. I hadn't worked as a sound engineer, and I was just coming in as hey, I built these mics. They sound awesome. And I didn't know what I didn't know. And I just didn't understand why condenser mics so clearly sounded so much better. And if you could perform with just a little bit of distance from them, it suddenly just like bloomed this wonderful natural sound. And your guitar, your fantastic vintage guitar, actually sounds like it's supposed to sound.
I had the good fortune of seeing a band in a relatively intimate space, but the sound engineer and the miking was done completely tailored to the acoustic experience. And it was great. You could hear everything. The fiddles sounded like fiddles. The hurdy-gurdy sounded like a hurdy-gurdy. That was my first close encounter with a hurdy-gurdy. So,
yeah, you never forget your first hurdy-gurdy.
No. This is really fascinating. If people want to find out more about Ear Trumpet, the various microphones and stuff, what's the best way for them to pursue that?
Well, the good old-fashioned website, eartrumpetlabs.com. We have hopefully some useful information on there, not just about our specific mics, but as you had mentioned, informational stuff on how to mic a bluegrass band and advice for bands on how to use mics, particularly in live performance. There's lots of videos on there. This is probably the most fun part of this whole job and having this business is that we have a whole series of videos that we shot in the workshop. We're pretty proud of a lot of really great performances that people have done coming through.
If you do visit the website, many of our favorite musicians and performers in bluegrass and some bluegrass adjacent world use these mics, and they sound so great. If you've ever been on a stage with a mic, you know how easy it is not to sound great, despite the fact that you might be highly skilled, because the miking and amping and engineering can really have an impact. So if you're going to give some advice to the acoustic musician who's aspiring to do work in spaces that require amplification, what would you suggest they do in terms of getting familiar with what type of amplification and miking they should get into?
It depends, being realistic about the kind of venues and spaces that you're going to play. Like, are you going to be playing coffee shop gigs and brew pubs and things where you're going to have to bring your own sound with you?
Right.
In which case, a small acoustic amp, the Fishman Loudbox series works great. I like those for little acoustic combo boxes, or a small, just 1 or 2 speaker PA and a really simple mixer. Are you going to have to be your own full sound person? That's usually what I would suggest, is like a pretty simple, small speaker system. I'm biased in this, but I think a decent sounding condenser mic for acoustic music is really the way to go. Ours are not the only ones out there. There are a lot of quite good quality small diaphragm condenser mics. So for instance, anybody miking a guitar, I would always suggest use at least one of those. I think our Dephina adds a little extra naturalness and character and beauty to the sound of a guitar, but don't use a 57. to mic an acoustic instrument if you can help it. There are options. I don't want to just be plugging my own mics. Once you get to trying to do multiple players and a full band, I think you need to be a little careful about your choices. They'll be better or worse as far as feedback resistance and usability in a live setting. And all I can say is that I designed with that in mind. There are a couple of other ones that work pretty well. If you go to festivals and things, look at what they're using.
Yeah, that's good.
The engineers that work festival stages know what they're doing as far as that kind of miking. You can always go over to the sound tent and ask them if you see a mic up and it seems to be working well. Go up and ask them what they're using. Some of them are great. Some of them are not so great.
Yeah. I've been at festivals where I had to literally go inside somewhere because they decided to make it so loud. I wanted to preserve my hearing. I saw that there's a quiz on the website which takes you through your intended use and configuration. I think that's very useful, if nothing else, to understand a little bit what factors are involved and what you might need to be thinking about. Philip, thank you so much for taking time. And on behalf of Bluegrass Brooklyn podcast, we're really proud to be using the microphones, and I think the show sounds great as a result. And we'll be really looking to see what happens next with Ear Trumpet. So thanks for joining us today.
Oh, so glad to be here. Thanks, Mike.
Please remember to follow us at Bluegrass Brooklyn. Brooklyn is spelled BKLYN. You can visit us at bluegrassbrooklyn.com. You can contact us at mike@bluegrassbrooklyn.com. We look forward to seeing you around the Jam Circle.